Why did Rob Reiner, one of Hollywood's most beloved storytellers, leave his own son exactly $1 in his final will, after that very son was arrested for brutally murdering him and his wife in their Brentwood estate? You heard that right. Not a trust fund. Not silence. One crisp, single US dollar. And what's more chilling, that dollar wasn't an oversight. It was a legal trap, a deliberate move designed to keep that son from ever fighting back. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It's the kind of story even Rob Reiner himself might have hesitated to write. Too dark, too twisted, too real. And yet, here we are. Because this story, this brutal, emotional, shocking unraveling of one of Hollywood's most iconic families, is very real. And what Jake Reiner just uncovered from his father's will, with a clause buried so deep it was practically designed to be forgotten, has ignited a firestorm that threatens to tear the Reiner legacy apart forever. But before we dig into the clause itself, and trust me, it's as shocking as it sounds, you need to understand how we got here. Because the murder was only the beginning. Let's rewind. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Brentwood, the kind of upper-tier Los Angeles neighborhood where silence is expensive and privacy is a luxury wrapped in 24/7 security. At 10:47 a.m., a frantic 911 call came from a young woman later identified as Romy Reiner, 27, daughter of Rob and Michelle. What she reportedly told the dispatcher chilled first responders before they even arrived. "There's blood everywhere," she said. "They're gone, and I think I know who did it." According to early police records, when officers entered the home, they found Rob Reiner, 78, and Michelle Singer Reiner, 70, both deceased. The cause was multiple sharp force injuries. The scene was described as violent and personal. The autopsy later confirmed what officers feared. This wasn't random. It wasn't a robbery. This was murder, and it had been done by someone who knew them well. Within hours, police arrested Nick Reiner, 32, their own son, who had been living in the guest house on the same property. Imagine that. Your parents, gone, and you're the first suspect because you're living just yards away. Neighbors whispered that they had seen Nick wandering late at night days before, muttering to himself. Staff at a local cafe said he'd shown up looking disheveled, angry, confused. But here's the thing. No one, and I mean no one, expected what came next. Because days after Nick's arrest, as the Reiner family began the legal process of handling the estate, something happened that stunned everyone in that room, especially Jake Reiner, Rob's eldest son and longtime confidant. During the formal reading of Rob Reiner's will, the lawyer, a quiet, stern man named Dale Norwood, who had been with the Reiner family for more than 2 decades, cleared his throat and delivered a line that landed like a sledgehammer. "To my son, Nicholas Reiner," he read, "I bequeath the sum of $1 and nothing more. Just $1. Not an omission. Not a blank space. A deliberate entry. Why?" Norwood explained calmly. "By naming Nick, we block him from legally contesting the will. That was Rob's final protection for the family. Let that sink in." Rob Reiner, a man known for directing heartwarming classics like Stand By Me and The Princess Bride, used one of the oldest and most brutal legal tactics in the inheritance playbook. Because if Nick had been left out entirely, if Rob had disinherited him completely, Nick could have challenged the will in court, claiming he'd been overlooked or omitted by mistake. But by including Nick and giving him exactly $1, Rob effectively closed the courtroom doors on his own son. It was clean. It was cold. And it was final. And it enraged Jake. Multiple witnesses at the reading say Jake stood up, voice shaking with fury, and shouted, "He shouldn't be mentioned. Not even symbolically. He murdered them." According to a staffer present, Jake stormed out, slamming the conference room door behind him. But here's where things get even stranger. Because this wasn't just a bitter family drama. It wasn't just about revenge from the grave. Rob Reiner's estate was valued at an estimated $65 million. It included rights to films, royalties, properties, and private investments. This was a legacy that had been carefully constructed over decades. And buried inside that legacy, inside the legal framework of his final will, was a silent war between father and son. One that, it turns out, may have started long before the murders. Sources close to the family say Rob, and Nick had a strained relationship for years. Nick battled addiction, mental health issues, and had reportedly been in and out of rehab throughout his 20s. He had a brief stint as a screenwriter, even co-wrote a film based on his own recovery, but nothing quite stuck. By the time he moved into the guest house behind Rob and Michelle's mansion, family members say he was isolated, paranoid, and bitter. And yet, Rob didn't fully sever ties. He let Nick live rent-free in the guest house. He kept him close, but not too close. Some now speculate this was intentional, a way to watch him, to control what damage he could do, to contain the threat. But what changed? What led Rob, a father, a peacemaker, to write a clause that offered his son $1 and shut the door on him legally forever? Was it fear? A final act of protection for Jake and Romy? Or was it guilt? A desperate measure to right a wrong that had festered inside the family for too long? Because make no mistake, this wasn't just legal strategy. This was personal. When the clause was revealed, friends of Rob say it was like a bomb went off in the family. Romy collapsed in tears. Jake reportedly called the clause proof that Dad saw it coming. But if Rob truly believed Nick was capable of such violence, why not take action sooner? Why not call the police? Why not move? And if Rob was so sure Nick couldn't be trusted, why let him live on the property at all? That's the contradiction at the heart of this tragedy. And it's one that's left even longtime friends of the Reiners divided. Some say Rob was naive, that he hoped Nick would change. Others believe Rob was playing a long game, that the will, the dollar, the entire setup was a final chess move. And it doesn't stop there. Because according to Dale Norwood, the lawyer who read the will, there were two versions of Rob Reiner's final testament. One was signed and filed just 3 months before the murders. The other? A handwritten draft with notes. A more emotional, more conflicted document that included lines like, "If Nick harms this family, it will be because I let him stay too close. I want to believe he can be saved, but I need to be ready if he can't." Jake allegedly found this draft, crumpled and shoved in the back of Rob's desk drawer, days after the funeral. It was there, alongside old family photos and a burnt letter addressed to no one. Now the Reiner estate is in lockdown. Legal teams are scrambling. The public wants answers. And the biggest question of all, was Rob Reiner's final act as a father one of forgiveness, or one of quiet revenge? As we begin this deep dive into the secrets of the will, the shocking clause, and the violent legacy that now defines one of Hollywood's most respected families, we'll uncover what Jake found next, and why it might change everything we think we know about the murders. Because the clause was just the beginning. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What really happened inside that $13.5 million Brentwood mansion on the morning of December 14th? And more importantly, what was Nick Reiner doing just hours before his parents were found butchered, while living only steps away in the guest house? Let's step inside the house. Let's rewind to the moment everything changed, not just for the Reiner family, but for Hollywood itself. It was a bright, quiet Sunday. Winter in Los Angeles, the kind where the air is cool but not biting, the sun rising slow over hills lined with palm trees and Teslas. Brentwood doesn't wake up loudly. The kind of wealth in this neighborhood is silent, guarded, discreet. Homes aren't just big, they're fortified. Walls of shrubbery, gates with facial recognition. The Reiner property was no exception. Rob had paid for top-of-the-line surveillance, reinforced locks, and motion-sensitive exterior lighting. That morning, nothing seemed unusual at first. A gardener passed the front of the estate around 9:30 a.m. and saw nothing but the usual: blinds drawn, fountains running, a sense of curated calm. A neighbor out walking their dog mentioned the house looked peaceful, still. But inside, it was something else entirely. According to the police report, the first official record came at exactly 10:47 a.m. A call came in from a private number. The dispatcher logged a young female voice. Frantic, sobbing, gasping for breath. "I think they're dead," she said. "There's blood everywhere. Oh my God. I didn't think it would be this bad." That voice belonged to Romy Reiner, the youngest child of Rob and Michelle. She had come to visit for brunch, something she did nearly every Sunday. She parked in the driveway. She noticed the front door slightly ajar. She called out for her parents. Silence. Then as she stepped inside, the living room was untouched. Pillows still fluffed. Rob's favorite book, Lincoln on Leadership, sitting neatly on the ottoman. It wasn't until she walked toward the office that the nightmare began. She found her mother first, slumped beside Rob's antique writing desk, blood pooled around her feet, face pale, body limp. The injuries were described later in medical documents as frenzied, defensive wounds, multiple deep cuts. Then Rob, face down, collapsed near the fireplace. Still holding what appeared to be a cell phone, screen cracked, covered in blood. Neither was breathing. Neither could be saved. And both had suffered the same fate, multiple sharp force injuries, the coroner wrote, inflicted with extreme force and little hesitation. But here's the part most people missed. The door to the guest house, locked. Police, arriving minutes later, found Nick Reiner behind it, alive, calm, and according to reports, completely unemotional. Let that sink in. Your parents are found brutally murdered in the same home you live in, and your first response is, what? Silence. Detective Arya Sandoval, who led the initial response, later told media, "We didn't have to chase him. We didn't have to question him. He was just sitting on the edge of his bed, looking like he was waiting for us." That statement alone sent shockwaves through the press. How does someone react like that? Was it shock? Was it guilt? Or was it part of a plan? Let's dig deeper. The layout of the Reiner estate is critical here. A sprawling, 8-bedroom mansion with a detached guest house roughly 40 feet away from the main building. Security cameras covered the perimeter, but there were known blind spots, areas near the rose garden and between the guest house and kitchen entrance. Rob had joked about them once in an interview. That's where the kids used to sneak out from. But those blind spots, they might have been the very paths the killer used. According to the time of death estimation, the murders occurred somewhere between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. Security footage confirms motion activity at 2:13 a.m. near the back patio. But then, curiously, the system shuts off. An abrupt software failure, something tech experts later called highly suspicious. In the hours that followed, there were no alarms, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Whoever did this had access. They knew the code. They knew the layout. They knew Rob and Michelle's habits. And here's the twist. Romy told police she noticed two things immediately missing when she arrived. 1. The framed family photo from the study wall. 2. Rob's legal folder, the same one he had been working on for weeks before his death. Coincidence? Or deliberate removal? Sources say Jake Reiner confirmed later that his father had been obsessively reviewing his will in the months prior, even changing key details with his lawyer Dale Norwood multiple times in October and November. Jake had asked him why. Rob's answer? Just making sure everything's airtight. Now, let's talk about the police's interaction with Nick. When officers entered the guest house around 11:10 a.m., Nick was wearing sweatpants, barefoot, eyes reportedly bloodshot. No visible injuries. No signs of struggle. No attempt to flee. When asked if he knew what happened, he allegedly replied, "You already know." He was taken into custody without incident. Inside the guest house, officers found a kitchen knife soaking in the sink, later ruled not the murder weapon, a journal with torn-out pages, a voice recorder with 2 files deleted between 3 to 4 a.m. The actual murder weapon, a long, serrated blade from Michelle's antique knife collection, was found hidden behind a loose panel in the garage hours later. And remember, Nick had access to that garage. Let's stop and ask the obvious. If he didn't do it, then who did? And why were certain things removed from the house, but others left untouched? Whoever the killer was, they weren't in a hurry. They moved through the house deliberately. They even turned off the security system from an internal panel, something only Rob, Michelle, and their children were known to use. So was this a crime of passion? Or a calculated attack? Now, let's go back to Romy for a moment. Because here's where the story gets even stranger. She told investigators, according to leaked reports, that 2 weeks earlier, Michelle had confided something unsettling. "Your father's worried about Nick," Michelle allegedly said. "He's not sleeping. He keeps wandering the house at night." Romy, thinking it was just tension, reportedly laughed it off. But then came the whisper. In the very 911 call she made, Romy, shaken, sobbing, but lucid, said something terrifying. "There's someone dangerous in this family, and you should start with him." She didn't name Nick directly, but she didn't have to. Police took the statement seriously. Within minutes, their focus shifted, and it never wavered. And still, no formal confession. Nick has maintained his silence. His lawyer, brought in within hours of the arrest, has refused media interviews, citing an ongoing investigation and psychological evaluations. But insiders say Nick is uncooperative, flat, disconnected, almost dissociated. Jake, meanwhile, has gone into media blackout. No public statements, no interviews, just a single tweet posted days after the funeral. "We tried. We really did." That tweet, now deleted. And yet, it speaks volumes. Because whatever Jake meant, whether about his family, his father, or his brother, it tells us one thing. This wasn't a sudden snap. This was the end of a long, slow collapse. A family breaking, bit by bit, until the dam burst. But the question lingers, did Rob know it was coming? Because remember, just days before his death, Rob finalized that will. And inside it, buried like a ticking time bomb, was the clause that named Nick and left him just $1. A symbolic act, a legal firewall, a final line in the sand. But here's what no one expected. That clause was only the beginning. Because as police dug deeper into the crime scene, past the blood, past the broken security systems, past the missing folder, they found something strange. A crumpled piece of paper tucked inside Rob's desk drawer. It was burned at the edges, partially destroyed. But one phrase still remained. One sentence, handwritten in Rob Reiner's unmistakable scrawl. Nick must never know what's in the second envelope. What second envelope? And more importantly, what was inside it? Because whatever it was, Rob died trying to keep it hidden. And what came next would unravel everything the Reiners tried so hard to protect. Why would Rob Reiner, a man known for his transparency and moral backbone, create two versions of his final will and hide one from his entire family? And more disturbingly, what was he so afraid of that he wrote the words, "Nick must never know," just days before he was murdered? This is where the truth starts to fracture, and the Reiner family secrets, long buried under Hollywood smiles and press-ready soundbites, begin to rise from the ashes. Because according to family insiders and verified legal sources, there wasn't just one will. There were two. Let's rewind to the day of the formal will reading. It happened 4 days after the funeral, in a discreet law office in Beverly Hills. No press, no cameras, just grief and tension present in the room. Jake Reiner, Romy Reiner, Dale Norwood, the family's attorney for over 25 years, a legal assistant, 2 security guards, at Jake's request. The atmosphere? Heavy. Still. No one made eye contact. Jake sat upright, fists clenched, eyes locked on Norwood. Romy, visibly shaken, kept glancing at her phone, almost like she was expecting something, or someone, to interrupt. And then Dale began to read. Rob's voice echoed through the room, not literally, but through the calm, emotionless cadence of Dale's reading. There were thank yous, tributes, a few funny lines. Michelle's jewelry to Romy, the film rights to an unproduced script to Jake. And then came the line that would change everything. To my son, Nicholas Reiner, I bequeath the sum of $1 and nothing more. There was silence. Then Jake spoke. A single sentence. That's not the will he showed me. Norwood looked up, slowly. And what he said next sent a jolt through the room. There's another version. But it was never signed. Let's pause. Why would Rob Reiner, master storyteller, lifelong planner, legal stickler, draft a version of his will and not sign it? Was it fear? Doubt? Or was he running out of time? According to Norwood, the second will, or personal draft as he called it, was handwritten, unofficial, stored in a locked drawer in Rob's home office. Discovered only after Romy tipped Jake off about something weird she'd seen their dad doing a few weeks before his death. That draft told a very different story. For starters, it didn't include the infamous $1 clause. In fact, it included no mention of Nick at all. Not a name, not a cent, nothing. And therein lies the legal twist. Because as Norwood explained, disinheriting a child entirely, without so much as a mention, opens the door to legal challenges. Contestation, especially in California. That's why, in the final, signed will, Rob added the dollar. A loophole, a sword and a shield. One symbolic coin tossed across a legal battlefield to prevent Nick from ever saying, "I was forgotten." But the draft? The unsent version? It painted a far more emotional picture. According to Jake, who read it first, alone in Rob's study, with tears reportedly streaming down his face, the handwritten pages included the following lines. I don't know how to love someone who keeps hurting us. I've failed him, and I fear he may one day fail all of us. This isn't about punishment. It's about peace. Those are not the words of a man indifferent to his son. Those are the words of a father in torment. A man torn between forgiveness and fear. And here's the gut punch. That draft was dated December 11th, just 3 days before Rob and Michelle were murdered. Why draft a new version that late? And why not sign it? Jake believes he knows why. He told police in his official statement, a portion of which was leaked to reporters, that Rob seemed on edge during their last phone call. He said, I might need you to come out here early next week, Jake recalled. I asked why. He said, I just need to make sure everything's in place. You'll understand soon. But Jake never made that trip, because 3 days later, Rob was dead. And Nick, the very man who was either being cut out or locked out, was in custody for the murder. So here's the question. Was Rob trying to replace the original will? Or was he having second thoughts about locking Nick out entirely? Let's not forget, Rob let Nick live on the property. He could have kicked him out at any time. He could have cut ties, but he didn't. Why? Was it guilt? Was it hope? Or, and this is the theory Jake refuses to speak on publicly, did Rob believe Nick was dangerous, and keeping him close was the only way to keep everyone else safe? Let's not gloss over that possibility. Because what if the will wasn't just a financial tool? What if it was a warning? A carefully worded alarm bell that Rob hoped would outlive him? Consider this. Buried at the end of the draft version of the will was a phrase, underlined twice. In the event of my death under suspicious circumstances, let this be reviewed in full by Jake, and Jake alone. Why Jake? Why not the lawyer? Why not Romy? And what did Rob mean by suspicious circumstances? Because if he truly feared for his safety, if he suspected someone, even his own son, why not go to the police? Why not leave explicit instructions? Here's where it gets murky. According to Norwood, Rob was frustrated with the system. He felt that if he sounded the alarm publicly, it would become a media circus, tabloids, headlines, damage to the family's name. Rob was a private man. Despite decades in the spotlight, he loathed gossip. He guarded his personal life the way a king guards a crumbling castle. So instead of going loud, he went quiet. He rewrote his will. He locked up the draft. And he counted on Jake to figure it out, if the worst happened. And now, it has. But Jake's fury doesn't stop at Nick. It's also pointed squarely at Norwood. Multiple sources close to the family say Jake accused the lawyer of failing to protect the family, of sticking too strictly to procedure when humanity was needed. At one point during the will reading, Jake reportedly said, you knew what he wanted. You knew what he feared. And you let the paperwork win. Norwood, calm as ever, replied, what I know, and what I can prove, are two different things. I follow signatures, not suspicions. That line, it lit a fire under Jake, one that hasn't gone out since. And here's the most devastating twist of all. Rob Reiner may have written that second will to protect his children, but by not signing it, he left behind a storm of confusion and betrayal. Because now, Jake and Romy are left to ask, did our father trust us enough? Or did he die unsure of us all? The public doesn't get to see the full draft. But one line, just one, has been leaked to press. In the end, we all become the stories they tell about us. I only hope mine doesn't end in silence. Rob wrote that, a storyteller to the end. And now, his story is being rewritten by legal chaos, family grief, and public speculation. But this tale isn't finished. Because that crumpled paper in Rob's drawer, the one with the burnt edges and the haunting phrase, Nick must never know. It wasn't alone. There was something else. A sealed envelope, unmarked, taped to the underside of Rob's desk drawer. And inside was something no one expected. Not a letter, not a confession, not even a revised will. But what was found inside that envelope would upend everything and force Jake to question everything he thought he knew about the man who raised him and the brother who may have destroyed it all. What drives a man to scream in a room full of lawyers that his own brother, the one just arrested for murdering their parents, doesn't even deserve to be mentioned by name? What snaps inside someone when grief collides with betrayal, and the very will that's supposed to bring closure opens a deeper wound instead. This was the moment Jake Reiner broke. But it wasn't just about $1. It was about a father's final decision and what it left behind. Let's go back to that now infamous day, the official reading of Rob Reiner's final will. The conference room was hushed. The air felt stale, recycled. A vase of untouched lilies sat in the center of the table, and somewhere, a grandfather clock ticked like a countdown. Jake had been calm up until that point, or at least he seemed to be. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, sitting next to Romy, who clutched a tissue like it was a lifeline. But the moment Dale Norwood, the lawyer, uttered those 12 words, "To my son Nicholas Reiner, I bequeath $1." The room went cold. Not silent. Cold. Romy inhaled sharply. The legal assistant stopped typing. Even the security guard outside the door reportedly tensed. And Jake stood up so fast his chair screeched against the polished wood floor. No, you don't get to do that. He doesn't get to be in this. His voice cracked midway through. It wasn't anger at first, it was disbelief. Then fury. He killed them. And you're telling me he's named in this will? Even for $1. Norwood, trying to remain composed, responded in legalese. Mr. Reiner, your father made a deliberate choice. Jake cut him off. Don't you dare tell me what my father wanted. I knew what he wanted. He told me. He said if anything happened, Nick wasn't to get anything. Not even a mention. Not even a damn syllable. He slammed his hand on the table, hard enough to knock over the vase. Water spilled across the legal documents, soaking Rob's carefully prepared estate paperwork. That's when he uttered the line that made headlines. He doesn't deserve to be named. Not even symbolically. And you could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a PR moment. This wasn't dramatics. This was a man who had just realized that even in death, his father couldn't fully cut ties with the son who destroyed everything. Jake left the room moments later. Walked out, didn't look back. Witnesses say he stood outside in the hallway for nearly an hour, pacing, breathing hard, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. And yet, no one followed him. Not Romy. Not Norwood. Not even the assistant. Because everyone understood one thing in that moment. This wasn't about a signature on paper. It was about legacy. About betrayal. About the final thread between father and son, and whether it had truly been severed. But here's what most people don't know. Jake wasn't just reacting to the $1. He had read the draft will. He had held it in his hands. The one that didn't mention Nick at all. The one Rob wrote just 3 days before his death. And when the official version, the one with the $1 clause, was read instead, Jake realized something horrifying. His father had changed his mind. And Jake had no idea why. Why would Rob rewrite the draft and reinsert Nick? Why give him anything, even symbolically, after years of estrangement? Unless Rob saw something coming. Unless Rob knew what might happen. Unless the $1 was part of a larger plan. Let's sit with that. Because Rob Reiner was not a man who did things by accident. He'd built his entire career on precision, storytelling, timing, structure. He understood setups and payoffs better than anyone. So when he added the $1 clause, it wasn't just symbolic. It was strategic. And Jake saw that too. Which is why the outburst wasn't just about anger. It was about fear. What if Rob hadn't tried to protect Jake and Romy? What if Rob had tried to protect Nick? And what if that protection is what got him killed? Because behind closed doors, Rob had been softening. There were whispers. Friends close to the family say Rob had been considering reconciling with Nick again. That he told one friend over lunch. Maybe this time, it'll be different. But Jake knew better. He'd watched the pattern for years. The lies. The stolen money. The rehab stints. The hollow apologies. Jake had picked up the pieces more than once. He'd driven Michelle to the hospital after Nick overdosed in their home. He'd confronted Nick after he allegedly threatened a housekeeper. He'd paid off debts, quietly, discreetly, just to keep the family name clean. And now? Now he was supposed to believe that his father left Nick just enough to stop a legal battle, but not enough to call it closure? That's what broke him. Because Jake didn't want Nick's silence. He wanted Nick erased. But Rob didn't give him that. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Because for all of Rob's genius, for all his planning, he still left a door open. Even if it was just a crack. Even if it was just for $1. And Jake, he felt that crack like a blade in his side. Back in that conference room, after Jake stormed out, Romy reportedly stayed seated. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just stared at the page that named Nick, her face unreadable. And after a long silence, she asked the one question no one could answer. What happens now? Because the will was done. The clause was in. The signatures were there. And whether Jake liked it or not, Nick Reiner had been named. But here's where the story takes another sharp turn. Just hours after the will reading, Jake did something no one expected. He drove back to the Brentwood estate. Alone. Quietly. Security footage shows him arriving around 6:12 p.m. He entered the house through the back door, the same one Romy had found slightly ajar the day of the murder. He went straight to Rob's office. And he didn't leave for nearly 3 hours. What was he doing? What did he find? Sources close to the investigation say Jake was searching for something Rob had hinted at during one of their final conversations. Something Rob called the contingency. A fallback. An emergency plan. A final truth, locked away in case the worst-case scenario played out. And it had. Jake reportedly tore the office apart. Flipped drawers. Pulled books from shelves. Ransacked cabinets. Until finally, behind the lower drawer of Rob's antique desk, he found something taped to the wood. A sealed envelope. Unmarked. Inside, not a letter, not another version of the will, but something even more disturbing. A photograph. An old one. And scrawled on the back, a single sentence in Rob's handwriting. If he ever finds this, it's already too late. That envelope and that photograph were immediately turned over to the police. What was in the image? Who was it of? Authorities haven't confirmed. But Jake's face when he handed it over, according to a staff member, was ghostly, pale, trembling, like he'd just seen a ghost, or the last piece of a puzzle that finally made the horror real. And while investigators combed through the house and lawyers debated the clause, Jake did something else. He issued a private directive to the estate manager. Every copy of that will, the signed one, is to be stored in legal custody only. No press. No leaks. And not a single one gets printed again. Because in Jake's mind, that dollar was blood money, a mark on their legacy, and he would spend every last cent of his own inheritance making sure Nick never saw a penny more than that. But what Jake didn't know was that Rob had left one more letter, one no one expected, one he never gave to his lawyer, because it wasn't written for the courts. It was written for Romy, and when she read it, she went straight to the police. Because what Rob confessed in that letter would change everything. What kind of father writes one final letter, not to his eldest son, not to his lawyer, but to his youngest daughter, and then hides it so carefully it's almost destroyed before it can ever be read? What kind of secret is so dangerous, so explosive, that the only safe way to preserve it is to almost let it burn? Romy Reiner hadn't planned to return to the house that day. She told police she wanted to remember her parents as they were, not as the headlines made them. But something pulled her back. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was that strange feeling she couldn't shake, the feeling that her father had tried to tell her something, but never got the chance. It started with a box. A small, weathered shoebox tucked behind a pile of magazines in Rob's private study. Not his public-facing office, but a smaller, quieter room tucked behind the kitchen. The one only the family ever used. This wasn't the room where the murder happened. This was where Rob went to write. It smelled like ink and cedar. The kind of room that held memories in the walls, even after tragedy had sucked the air out. Romy opened the box absent-mindedly. Inside, faded photos, old receipts, scribbled notes from film shoots, and a folded piece of stationery half-burnt at the edges. Charred. Fragile. But not gone. She unfolded it carefully, the ash flaking off like dried tears. What she read next stopped her cold. If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to explain in person. I never wanted to put this on you. But you always saw more than the rest. Maybe you were the only one who ever truly did. There was no greeting. No dear Romy. No date. But she knew the handwriting. It was unmistakably Rob's, scrawling, thoughtful, firm. He had written it to her, and never sent it. The letter continued. You've always known there's something broken in Nick. You saw it in ways Jake refused to. Maybe he didn't want to believe it. Maybe I didn't either. But you always asked the hard questions. Then came the line that made Romy tremble. I've kept him close because I'm afraid. Not of what he'll do to me, but of what he'll do to you. To Jake. If I don't give him the illusion of safety, I think he'll shatter. She dropped the page. She sat there on the floor, staring at it, shaking. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Because Rob hadn't just feared Nick. He'd calculated around him. He had created a psychological maze, one filled with half-truths, legal firewalls, and emotional loopholes, all to keep Nick from detonating. But it hadn't worked. And now 2 people were dead. Romy read on, desperate for more. The letter was fragmented. The fire had erased whole lines, sentences, ideas. But what remained painted a portrait of a man preparing for something inevitable. If anything happens to me, it wasn't random. You know who to look at. You'll feel it in your gut. You already do. And then the most haunting sentence of all. There is a second envelope. It must not reach him. Ever. Second envelope. The same words Jake had found scrawled on the back of the burnt photo in Rob's office. The second envelope. But Romy hadn't seen any other envelope until she looked up. Because in that moment, shaken, confused, scared, she noticed something strange. The vent cover above Rob's desk was slightly crooked. Not loose. Not falling off. Just crooked, tilted. And the screws looked like they had been touched recently. Her breath caught. She stood on the chair and reached inside. Her fingers brushed against something thin. Paper. Enclosed in a Ziploc bag. She pulled it out and climbed down, heart hammering. It was addressed in Rob's handwriting. But not to her. Not to Jake. Not to Dale Norwood or any lawyer. It was addressed to Detective Arya Sandoval, the lead investigator on Rob and Michelle's murder case. Let that sink in. Rob had written a letter to the police before he died and hidden it in an air vent inside his private study. He didn't trust lawyers. He didn't trust Jake. He didn't even trust Romy fully with its contents. He trusted a detective because he knew something might happen. Romy didn't open the letter. She walked out of the house, drove to the nearest LAPD precinct, and asked to speak to Sandoval personally. It took hours for the red tape to clear, for the right hands to touch the letter, for the protocol to be followed. But eventually, Romy was allowed to sit in the observation room while Sandoval read the contents. What she saw on the detective's face, the tightening jaw, the slow exhale, the sudden glance back at the one-way mirror, confirmed everything. Whatever was in that letter, it wasn't just a warning. It was evidence. But the public doesn't know what it says. Not yet. It's sealed in the official investigation files. Locked down. Not even Jake has been given access. When reporters asked about it, Sandoval replied only, "It's significant." But what does that mean? Was it a confession? A description? Did Rob know something we don't? Romy thinks so. Because just before she left the precinct, Sandoval took her aside and asked a simple question. "Did your father ever tell you who was in the house the night before?" Romy shook her head. Sandoval just nodded, almost solemnly. He knew. He knew. That phrase keeps echoing through the Reiner family. He knew. Rob Reiner, the man who built his legacy on heart and humor, died not with peace, but with dread. He knew something was coming. He tried to stop it, and when he couldn't, he documented it. For the record, for his children, and maybe for justice. But here's where it gets even darker. Because later that night, Romy went home and started digging through her own journals, things she hadn't opened in years. Old notebooks, half-filled pages, scribbled memories. And she found something she had forgotten. A passage from 3 years earlier. A night when Nick had shown up to her apartment, unannounced. Drunk, crying, rambling. She had written down his words because they scared her. He said, "If he ever cuts me off, I'll take him out. I'll take them all out. They don't get to erase me." She had dismissed it as drunken melodrama. But now it felt like prophecy. She snapped a photo and sent it to Detective Sandoval. Because for the first time in her life, Romy realized something she'd never wanted to admit. Her father hadn't died in a tragic accident. He'd died in the exact way he feared he might, by the hand of the son he tried too long to save. And the only question now? Was it already too late to stop what came next? Because the second envelope had been found. But who else had seen it? Who knew about it before Romy? Who might have been searching for it, even now? Because when Sandoval opened the investigation further the next morning, they discovered something disturbing. A set of fingerprints on the inside of the air vent. And they didn't belong to Rob. They didn't belong to Romy. They didn't even belong to Jake. They belonged to someone who shouldn't have had access. Someone who knew where to look. And that someone would soon become the center of a storm no one in the Reiner family could have predicted. What do you write in a letter you know will only be read after your death, and only if the person reading it has just discovered you've been murdered? And why would Rob Reiner hide such a letter inside a personal safe no one knew existed, except for his son Jake? This was the moment the story cracked open even further. Because up until now, everything had been speculation, theories, fragments of burned paper, whispers behind closed doors. But the sealed letter? This was Rob's voice, his mind, his final and censored truth, and it was never meant to be public. Not unless the worst-case scenario became reality. And now it had. Let's rewind to how the letter was found. After Romy turned over the air vent envelope to Detective Arya Sandoval, she immediately called Jake. The call was brief. She didn't go into details. Just said 6 words. Check the safe. You know which one. Jake did. Because years ago, during one of Nick's darker episodes, Rob had quietly taken Jake aside during a family gathering. He hadn't said much. Just, there's a backup safe. If anything ever happens, if I'm not around, go there first. Jake remembered where. Not in the obvious places. Not behind a painting or inside a cabinet. But beneath the floorboard in Rob's upstairs writing room, the one only Rob used. The one not even Romy had keys to. It took Jake nearly an hour to find the exact plank. The old house creaked under his feet. The air was thick. The silence oppressive. He pulled up the board with a crowbar and found the small steel compartment exactly where Rob had described. Inside, one manila envelope. Taped shut. No dust. Recently placed. It was marked simply, Jake. Read in solitude. No date. No address. Just a name and an instruction. Jake closed the door, sat on the floor, and opened the envelope with shaking hands. What he read next would alter everything he thought he knew about the man who raised him and the brother he could no longer recognize. The letter began plainly. Jake, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if I'm gone, it wasn't an accident. You know that. I know you do. Already, the tone was different from the other writings. This wasn't Rob the director. This wasn't the charming wordsmith or the careful strategist. This was a father, writing to his son, and he wasn't hiding anymore. There are things I never told you. Things I should have. But I wanted to protect you. And Romy. And maybe even Nick. God help me. Jake's hands trembled. His eyes burned. Because the next paragraph confirmed every suspicion, and then some. I made a mistake, years ago. When Nick was 17, something happened. He got into a fight with a family friend. It turned violent. It got covered up. Quietly. I paid off the right people. I buried it. Because I thought he'd change. I thought it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. There it was. Proof. That Rob had known, for years, what Nick was capable of, and had chosen silence over confrontation. But the letter wasn't finished. The will, the clause, the dollar. You need to know it wasn't just about cutting him out. It was about containing him. Legally. Symbolically. Psychologically. I thought if he knew he was still seen, even just symbolically, it might keep him from unraveling. From doing what I feared he might do. Jake's jaw clenched. His father hadn't cut Nick off entirely. He had given him something. Not because he believed in him, but because he feared what might happen if he didn't. And then came the part that made Jake drop the letter and walk away for nearly 20 minutes. He would later describe it to Romy as a betrayal dressed up as protection. I considered leaving him more. Not money, but a piece of land. Something remote. A cabin. A trust that paid only for therapy. I drafted it. Then tore it up. Because I realized I was still parenting a threat. Not a son. That line tore Jake in half. Because it meant Rob had almost given Nick away back in. Even after everything. And still, he hadn't told Jake. Hadn't prepared him. Hadn't trusted him with the truth. I know you're angry, the letter went on. Maybe at me. Maybe at yourself. Maybe at God. I don't blame you. But if you're reading this, I need you to finish what I started. Then came the instructions. Clear. Deliberate. Like a mission. There is a second ledger. It's not in the bank. It's not with Norwood. It's here. In the house. Hidden in the cabinet beneath my vinyl collection. It contains transactions. Payments. Dates. All tied to Nick. I kept records. Not to shame him. But to protect you. In case it ever came to this. Jake's hands began to sweat. He felt sick. His father had been tracking Nick. Not just emotionally. Financially. Legally. Paper trails. Payoffs. Possibly blackmail. He raced downstairs, tore through the record cabinet, and found a false drawer. Inside was a small, leather-bound book. Rob's handwriting again. Tight. Precise. Inside, a timeline of events from 2011 to 2024. Therapy sessions. Legal threats. Hospital visits. Money transfers to unknown individuals labeled only with initials. A payment labeled CD, hush $, dated 6 months before the murder. What did it all mean? Who was CD? What were the threats Rob had silenced? And why had he waited until it was too late to tell his children? Jake didn't know what to feel. Was his father a coward? A hero? A man trapped by guilt? Or all of the above? He clutched the ledger in one hand, the letter in the other, and felt his knees give out. He dropped to the floor and wept, because the final paragraph of the letter wasn't about Nick. It was about Jake. I never told you this, but I always saw you as the one who would carry the name forward. What really goes on inside the mind of a man who allegedly murdered both his parents, then sat calmly in the guest house while their blood soaked into the floorboards next door? What do you say when your own family describes you as a ticking time bomb, and your father, before his death, leaves behind ledgers of your past violence, hospitalizations, and payouts? And what kind of person records voice memos the week of a double homicide, talking to himself? This was where the investigation pivoted, from the external chaos of family betrayal and legal drama, to the internal storm brewing inside Nick Reiner's fractured psyche. And the tapes he left behind? They were nothing short of haunting. Let's start with what we know. Nick Reiner, age 32, had been living in the guest house on his parents' Brentwood estate for the past 2 years. Not working, not actively in treatment, not in recovery, just existing. Family insiders now say that arrangement had become tense long before the murders. Michelle Reiner, in particular, had grown increasingly anxious about Nick's presence on the property. One friend recalled Michelle saying, "It's like he's always listening, even when he's not in the room." Rob, ever the optimist, had reportedly defended the arrangement, telling friends, "At least we can keep an eye on him here." But sometimes, keeping someone close is the most dangerous move you can make, especially when that person feels like a prisoner, not a son. Enter the tapes. 2 days after Jake handed over Rob's private ledger and sealed letter to the LAPD, Detective Aria Sandoval authorized a forensic sweep of the guest house. Hidden behind a stack of DVD boxes, mostly old comedies, oddly enough, they found a digital voice recorder. Tascam model. 1 gigabyte of storage. And on that device, 9 voice memos. 7 of them were deleted. Forensic techs recovered 5. 3 were nearly inaudible, but 2 were crystal clear. Both recorded in the same week Rob and Michelle were murdered. And both deeply unsettling. Let's break them down. Voice memo number 1, recorded December 10th, 10:22 p.m. Nick's voice is low, monotone, almost detached. "They think I'm sleeping. They think I'm getting better. But I'm not. I'm just quieter." He laughs once. Dry, cold. "Dad keeps asking about the clause. Thinks I don't know. Thinks the lawyer didn't slip." Pause. "I know everything. I know where the safes are. I know who gets what. I know what they think of me." The tape clicks as he shifts. $1. That's what he thinks I'm worth. 1F ****ing dollar. Then silence for 12 seconds. Then this. Let's see if that dollar can buy peace. The memo ends. Let that sink in. Nick knew about the clause. Knew about the symbolic inheritance. Knew it was designed to block him legally. But how? How did he find out? Had someone inside the family told him? Or, and this is what investigators are now exploring, did someone from Rob's legal circle leak it? Because remember, the draft version of the will didn't name Nick. Only the final signed one did. And if Nick knew about it in advance, he didn't just find out randomly. Someone talked. Someone warned him. And that leads us to the second memo. Voice memo number 2, recorded December 13th, 1:12 a.m. This one is darker, angrier. Nick is pacing, breathing heavily. The audio clicks every few seconds, as if he's turning the recorder on and off mid-thought. "She looked at me like I was dirt," likely referring to Michelle. "I could hear her whispering to Dad, saying I wasn't safe, that I needed to go." Sound of something being slammed. "I was born here. I was raised here. They're just actors, pretending they know me." Another pause. A heavy exhale. You don't erase a son. You don't write him out. You don't put a price on blood. Then, something that chilled everyone who heard it. If they want a legacy so bad, I'll carve it into the walls. The memo ends. Detectives believe this tape was recorded just hours before the murders. Now let me ask you something directly. What do you make of that? Are those the words of a man spiraling or strategizing? Because that kind of language, carve it into the walls, it doesn't sound like a breakdown. It sounds like a statement, a promise. But here's the part that truly baffles even trained psychologists. When police entered the guest house the next morning and found Nick sitting alone on the edge of his bed, he showed no sign of emotional distress. No tears, no outbursts, just a flat stare, as if nothing had happened. One officer later described it as the calmest arrest I've ever made and the most unsettling. Like he was waiting. And maybe he was. Because what came next suggests Nick may have anticipated everything. The arrest, the press, the trial. Because inside his room, they also found a folder labeled, chillingly, "In the event of my death." But it wasn't about his death. It was about theirs. Inside, clippings of past media coverage of Rob Reiner, articles about celebrity estate disputes, a printed copy of California inheritance laws, a highlighted paragraph on contesting wills with symbolic disinheritance, the exact $1 clause Rob used. It wasn't just preparation. It was premeditation. But why? Why this week? Why this moment? Detectives believe something triggered it, a final straw. And the current theory? It was a confrontation the night before the murders. An argument. One that reportedly woke up the neighbors. 2 separate 911 calls were made from adjacent properties that evening, both citing shouting and glass breaking. The police arrived, but were turned away by Michelle, who claimed it was just a family disagreement. But what if it wasn't? What if that was the moment Rob told Nick about the clause? What if that was when the thin thread holding Nick together finally snapped? And yet, even now, Nick has said nothing. Not during the arrest. Not in holding. Not in psychiatric evaluation. Complete silence. His lawyer is pushing for an insanity plea, but detectives aren't convinced. Because the memos? The folder? The deliberate hiding of evidence? Those aren't the actions of a man detached from reality. They're the signs of someone in control. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing and why. Jake Reiner, after hearing the tapes, reportedly said, he wasn't crazy. He was angry, and he waited until he had the stage. That phrase, the stage, is important. Because for years, Nick had lived in the shadow of his famous father. A man beloved by the public, admired by peers, respected by the industry. And Nick? A writer who couldn't sell a second script. A rehab regular. A tabloid ghost. Jake thinks that dynamic drove the final crack. He resented Dad for being loved. He resented us for surviving him. That dollar wasn't an insult to Nick, it was a spotlight. And Nick? Nick took the spotlight back. In blood. In silence. And now, possibly in court. Because here's the twist. Nick's legal team has just filed a motion. They're trying to declare the entire will invalid. Despite the $1 clause. Despite the planning. Their argument? That Rob Reiner was under undue emotional distress when he signed it. They claim his deteriorating mental state, fear, paranoia, manipulation, voids his final decision. And if they succeed, Nick could be entitled to millions. But the prosecution isn't backing down. Not with the tapes. Not with the burned letters. Not with the sealed confession Rob left behind. Because while Nick may have thought silence would protect him, Rob's voice, even after death, may still be the loudest in the room. But the fight isn't over. Because one final voice is about to enter the arena. Someone who knew Rob's fears. Someone who had access to the legal drafts. Someone who, until now, stayed silent. Tracy Reiner. And when she breaks her silence, the next chapter of this family's collapse will begin. Why would someone leave a voice memo before a murder and delete it immediately afterward? And more importantly, how does a person speak so? Why would Rob Reiner, a man known for his transparency and moral backbone, create 2 versions of his final will and hide one from his entire family? And more disturbingly, what was he so afraid of that he wrote the words, "Nick must never know," just days before he was murdered? This is where the truth starts to fracture, and the Reiner family secrets, long buried under Hollywood smiles and press-ready soundbites, begin to rise from the ashes. Because according to family insiders and verified legal sources, there wasn't just one will. There were 2. Let's rewind to the day of the formal will reading. It happened 4 days after the funeral, in a discreet law office in Beverly Hills. No press, no cameras, just grief and tension present in the room. Jake Reiner, Romy Reiner, Dale Norwood, the family's attorney for over 25 years. A legal assistant. 2 security guards, at Jake's request. The atmosphere? Heavy. Still. No one made eye contact. Jake sat upright, fists clenched, eyes locked on Norwood. Romy, visibly shaken, kept glancing at her phone, almost like she was expecting something or someone to interrupt. And then Dale began to read. Rob's voice echoed through the room, not literally, but through the calm, emotionless cadence of Dale's reading. There were thank yous, tributes, a few funny lines. Michelle's jewelry to Romy. The film rights to an unproduced script to Jake. And then came the line that would change everything. To my son, Nicholas Reiner, I bequeath the sum of $1 and nothing more. There was silence. Then Jake spoke. A single sentence. That's not the will he showed me. Norwood looked up, slowly. And what he said next sent a jolt through the room. There's another version. But it was never signed. Let's pause. Why would Rob Reiner, master storyteller, lifelong planner, legal stickler, draft a version of his will and not sign it? Was it fear? Doubt? Or was he running out of time? According to Norwood, the second will, or personal draft as he called it, was handwritten, unofficial, stored in a locked drawer in Rob's home office. Discovered only after Romy tipped Jake off about something weird she'd seen their dad doing a few weeks before his death. That draft told a very different story. For starters, it didn't include the infamous $1 clause. In fact, it included no mention of Nick at all. Not a name, not a cent, nothing. And therein lies the legal twist. Because as Norwood explained, disinheriting a child entirely, without so much as a mention, opens the door to legal challenges. Contestation, especially in California. That's why, in the final, signed will, Rob added the dollar. A loophole, a sword and a shield. One symbolic coin tossed across a legal battlefield to prevent Nick from ever saying, I was forgotten. But the draft? The unsent version? It painted a far more emotional picture. According to Jake, who read it first, alone in Rob's study, with tears reportedly streaming down his face, the handwritten pages included the following lines. I don't know how to love someone who keeps hurting us. I failed him, and I fear he may one day fail all of us. This isn't about punishment. It's about peace. Those are not the words of a man indifferent to his son. Those are the words of a father in torment. A man torn between forgiveness and fear. And here's the gut punch. That draft was dated December 11th, just 3 days before Rob and Michelle were murdered. Why draft a new version that late? And why not sign it? Jake believes he knows why. He told police in his official statement, a portion of which was leaked to reporters, that Rob seemed on edge during their last phone call. He said, I might need you to come out here early next week, Jake recalled. I asked why. He said, I just need to make sure everything's in place. You'll understand soon. But Jake never made that trip, because 3 days later, Rob was dead. And Nick, the very man who was either being cut out or locked out, was in custody for the murder. So here's the question. Was Rob trying to replace the original will? Or was he having second thoughts about locking Nick out entirely? Let's not forget, Rob let Nick live on the property. He could have kicked him out at any time. He could have cut ties, but he didn't. Why? Was it guilt? Was it hope? Or, and this is the theory Jake refuses to speak on publicly, did Rob believe Nick was dangerous, and keeping him close was the only way to keep everyone else safe? Let's not gloss over that possibility. Because what if the will wasn't just a financial tool? What if it was a warning? A carefully worded alarm bell that Rob hoped would outlive him? Consider this. Buried at the end of the draft version of the will was a phrase, underlined twice. In the event of my death under suspicious circumstances, let this be reviewed in full by Jake, and Jake alone. Why Jake? Why not the lawyer? Why not Romy? And what did Rob mean by suspicious circumstances? Because if he truly feared for his safety, if he suspected someone, even his own son, why not go to the police? Why not leave explicit instructions? Here's where it gets murky. According to Norwood, Rob was frustrated with the system. He felt that if he sounded the alarm publicly, it would become a media circus, tabloids, headlines, damage to the family's name. Rob was a private man. Despite decades in the spotlight, he loathed gossip. He guarded his personal life the way a king guards a crumbling castle. So instead of going loud, he went quiet. He rewrote his will. He locked up the draft. And he counted on Jake to figure it out, if the worst happened. And now, it has. But Jake's fury doesn't stop at Nick. It's also pointed squarely at Norwood. Multiple sources close to the family say Jake accused the lawyer of failing to protect the family, of sticking too strictly to procedure when humanity was needed. At one point during the will reading, Jake reportedly said, "You knew what he wanted. You knew what he feared. And you let the paperwork win." Norwood, calm as ever, replied, "What I know, and what I can prove, are two different things. I follow signatures, not suspicions." That line, it lit a fire under Jake, one that hasn't gone out since. And here's the most devastating twist of all. Rob Reiner may have written that second will to protect his children, but by not signing it, he left behind a storm of confusion and betrayal. Because now, Jake and Romy are left to ask, did our father trust us enough? Or did he die unsure of us all? The public doesn't get to see the full draft. But one line, just one, has been leaked to press. In the end, we all become the stories they tell about us. I only hope mine doesn't.